Hey guys, welcome back. On today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at charts inside Filament 3. On the previous episode, we looked into statistic widgets inside Filament. If you are interested, I will leave the link for that video in the description, as well as I will have it in the cards. So today we're going to be taking a look at charts. Now, Filament supports multiple types of charts. Actually, let's take a look at the documentation. It supports bar charts, bubble charts, donut, line, pie, polar area, radar, and scatter. So you can use any of these charts that you like. So let's go ahead and see how we can actually use them. So I have the project from previous video, but if you're just joining the series, you can actually start with any Filament project. We're not going to be using any of the existing code that I already have here. So if you have a kind of freshly installed Filament project, you should be good to go. You can actually go ahead and follow along. So let's get started. So the first step for us is to actually create a chart widget, and that's very easy to do. So let's move to our code base, guys. Open up your terminal and type the following command. So we're going to be using artisan, PHP artisan, make filament widget. So this is similar to statistic widgets or stats widgets. And then we need to give it a name. So I'm going to name mine, I guess, test chart widget. Okay, you can pick any name you like, hit enter. Then you will see this kind of interactive menu, and go ahead and select chart for the type of widget you would like to create. Okay, so I'm going to hit chart. It's going to be the first option. Next up, it's going to ask you if you would like to create this chart for a specific resource. This doesn't really impact the code itself. It just kind of impacts where it's going to be in terms of directory structure, as far as I know. But again, we want our chart to be kind of used everywhere on our website. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter. And last but not least, it's going to ask you where you want this to be placed. So the two options are admin and app Livewire. So admin is going to be placed inside your Filament folder, okay? And that's the one I personally prefer. The second option is going to put it the same place that your Livewire components are. So it's up to you, but I prefer the first option. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that. And last but not least, since we selected a chart, it's going to ask what type of chart you want. Now, you can definitely change this later on in the code itself, so it's not really important. But for now, I'm going to be using the line chart because I think it's the simplest to use. And so I'm going to go ahead and use the line chart. All right, let's hit enter, and you should get something like this. Basically, successfully created the widget. I'm going to close the terminal. And now we can go ahead and actually take a look at the code. So inside your Filament folder, there should now be a widgets folder if this is the first widget you're creating. And as you guys can see, we have this test chart widget that extends the chart widget. And basically you can see the type is over here. So if you want to later on change this from, let's say, the line to, you know, some other donut or whatever, bar chart, you can just come over here and change the type, so you don't have to, you know, delete it and recreate it. But again, the command is still useful. You know, it will automatically populate it for you. So now let's go back to our code and see what has happened. So if I reload now, as you can see, Filament has automatically detected the chart for us using its kind of auto discovery, and we can see our chart already placed here. Now, there is a heading over here that kind of says chart. As you can see, it's controlled using this property. So if you want to change it to something else, you can go ahead and, you know, add anything you like over here. So I'm going to go ahead, update it. And if we reload, as you guys can see, this got reloaded. So that's the first step. The next step is actually to populate our chart with some data. And that's, I think, the main part or the main question that people struggle with. So let's go ahead and see how you can figure out what should be passed in. So there is this method over here, get data, and this is basically where you need to return the data that should be shown or populated inside the chart. But how do you kind of know what should be returned? So for this one, you need to go ahead and actually refer to the Filament documentation and chart.js documentation. There are too many charts for me to make a video for every single one, even though I technically could. I want you guys to know how to do it on your own. Okay, so what you need to do, guys, is go ahead and open up the Filament website on the documentation section. Go ahead and find widgets, scroll down and select chart widgets. Okay, so I have already done this, and I will also put the link for this in the description. It kind of explains the same things we have done so far, so we can ignore these. But if you scroll down, there is kind of an example for the line chart. Okay, obviously if you're using the line chart, you can just copy this and use this. But what if you want to use some other chart? How do you know what should be returned? Okay, instead of memorizing these, it's actually very easy to do. Scroll down a little bit and it shows you the available chart types. And it also has the link for the documentation for all of those, right? So let's say I'm going to use line chart so we can compare it with the example and see exactly how it matches it. So I'll select line chart and I'll open it on a new tab. And if you take a look at the example here, so for a line chart, which is this one, we need to return a data set inside our data set key, a labels key, and then inside that data set we have a label and a data, right? So the data is obviously the corresponding values on the chart for each of these labels that we have, and then the label is the data itself. Okay, so and now let's go ahead and look at the chart.js documentation. Now on the documentation, obviously they give you a simple demo, but if you look at it, there's also a code section, and obviously the type is line, and then we have this data. So what we are returning inside this get data is actually kind of similar to this data itself, okay? But we are just doing it in PHP. And if you look at this setup, it actually shows you kind of the data format, okay? You can just kind of look at this as an example. So it accepts a label, right? And if you look at the example given on the Filament documentation, there is a labels, sorry, not label, labels. So it matches exactly the same. Then there is a data set, and inside that data set, there is a label and a data, okay? So the kind of required ones are label and data. The rest are optional. And that's exactly what we are returning here, right? So we have this data set, and then inside that, we have another array of label and a data. So as you can see, it matches exactly with what is given inside the chart.js, documentation. And of course, if you want to add some additional, configurations, maybe you want to change the border color and things like that, you can look at the documentation and add them here to those configurations. So let's go ahead and start with that. I'll go ahead and for now, I'll just copy it here because I don't want to type all of these. So I'll just copy it from the documentation, what we have, and I'll put it inside this get data, as you guys can see. And obviously, if we just paste this here, it should work out the box. I'll go back and I'll reload our own project. And as you guys can see, we got the chart showing, right? So that's the basics of it, guys. Super simple to do. You just need to be a little bit patient and actually, try it out and see if you face any issues or not. So now that we have covered line chart, I do want to show you guys another chart as well, so you can see the process I just mentioned for other chart types. So let's go ahead and try, let's say, we could maybe do a pie chart. Let's see. Let's go ahead and open a pie chart. So we have a pie chart over here, very simple chart. Obviously, the first thing I need to do is I need to change the type of my chart. So I'll just zoom in here. I'll copy it from here. So it's called actually donut, not pie. And I'll replace this get type to donut. Of course, I can create a new widget. I'm not going to do that to save time. Now we need to go ahead and update this section over here. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this setup. By the way, this is explained a little bit more at the bottom, but I personally prefer to just look at this example over here. So as you can see, it does have a labels. So it's somewhat similar to line chart. So we don't really need to change these labels that much, but obviously we don't need all these ones. Let's say I'll add two labels. I do label A and label B. All right. So the labels are all these colors here, right? So red, yellow, and blue, right? That's three labels over there, right? And exactly matches here. Then we have this data set section, which we already have from the line chart. And inside that, we have label and data, which are kind of always the required ones, bare minimum. And then the other stuff are just visual stuff that we don't need. So for the label, I just keep it as is. And last thing we need to do is we need to add some data. Okay, now the data needs to match the labels you have added in the same order. So for example, red is the first one. So 300 is going to be the value of red. And if you look at the example they have given, if I hover over red, as you guys can see, it is 300, right? And then after that, in the labels, it was blue. And here we have 50. So if I go in the chart, as you can see, this is 50. And of course, yellow is going to follow the same thing. So for example, if I want A to be, let's say, 600, I'll put 600 first because A is first in my labels list. And then for B, maybe I want it to be 365, okay? Any number you guys like. And that's it. So that's all I have to do to go from, let's say, a line chart, a line chart to a donut or a pie chart, okay? I'll save this. Now we can go back. And if I reload, guys, as you can see, we get ourselves this little pie chart over here, right? And of course, I could add a bit more classes. So let's say I add a C as well. Let's go ahead and add 450. And if I go back, as you can see, we get an extra one. Now, we do have an issue here. All of them are the exact same color. So how can you go ahead and change color in these cases? So for this, we need to go ahead and take a look at the documentation. I'll go back to the pie chart one. And if you look at it over here, guys, as you can see, there is another one called background color, right? Now, technically, it does have a default, so it's not required. But what it does is it says all the colors to what we have, right? Which, you know, it works, but it looks very ugly. And it's also not that readable when you quickly look at it. So we can go ahead and add these colors as well, right? And it follows the same thing as data. So you're going to pass in an RGB color, I think a hex color for every single label that you have, right, in the same order. So I'll just copy it from the documentation. I don't want to type these colors, so I'll add them over here. And of course, this is in JavaScript, so I'll need to change this to PHP code. So let me add the quotation marks. This should be an equal and an arrow. And I think everything else is correct. I'll save this up. I have an extra semicolon. Now I think it's correct. Okay, so let's save this. Now if we go back, hopefully we get 3 different colors, as you guys can see. So that's also how you change the color. So for this one, guys, you do need to refer to the documentation quite a bit for every single chart. But generally, if you just follow the example data they have over here in the documentation, you should be good to go. And of course, some trial and error is required if you haven't used the chart before and it's your first time, right? But the process is very straightforward, and the documentation for Chart.js is very good. If you just look at the example here, you should be able to set it up. And of course, the same process follows for all the other chart types, right? There's quite a lot of them. It's a bit too much for me to cover in one video. How many is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different charts. So yeah, I showed you guys 2 of them, but the rest are going to be quite similar as well. Of course, if you guys have a question, you can ask me in the comments and I'll try to help you guys out. So now that we have covered the basics of it, last thing I want to show you guys is actually how to change the size of the chart, right? So let's say you have created a chart, and by default, as you can see, it's kind of like taking half the screen. Even if I zoom out, it's half the screen, right? You may want your chart to be full width, or you want to change kind of the width or column span. How can you do that? So there is actually a property to control this. And we can memorize these, but what I do, I usually go ahead and if you're on VS Code or PHP Storm, you can always go ahead and inspect classes that you're extending. So if you're on Windows, I believe you need to do control click. If you're on Mac, do command click if you have your PHP plugins installed. So I'll do that. I'll open up this chart widget. And then from this charts widget, I'll go ahead and I click on the widget itself. So it also extends another class of widget. And once we go here, we need to scroll down a little bit. And we should be able to find this kind of column span property, okay? So I'll just copy this and I'll paste this out. Of course, over time, you kind of know that it exists, but you might forget it. So I'll just copy it, paste that over here. And this is similar to the column span that you find inside your resources when you're kind of adding the column span for forms. So it accepts a string, int, or an array. So with the array, you can kind of give it different sizes for different screen sizes. But in this case, for example, if I want it to be full width, I'm going to say full. All right. And that's all I have to do. I'll just type that in. And if I go back, as you guys can see, it is now full width. I'll reset back to the kind of original size. It is a little bit too big, but as you guys can see, it does indeed work. And then I'll zoom in again. Of course, you can change this to anything you like. Okay. Obviously, this is also dependent on your page column span, but if I set it to 2, it's still full width. If I set it back to 1, it's going to obviously take half the size. Okay. So that's for also changing up the col span for the charts. All right. So that's going to be the main basics of it, guys. If you want, you can technically leave the video. But one more thing I want to show you guys is actually if you're working with line charts or bar charts, how can we actually get the data easily? So right now we have hard coded it. So let me go ahead and change this back into a line chart real quick. And I'll just copy the example from the documentation if I can. All right. And of course, we also need to go ahead and change the type back into a line chart. So right now we have these hard-coded data. What if you want to load this from your database? Okay, you have a model and you want to, for example, get the number of newly registered users every month. How can you do that? Well, if you want to do it on your own, it's going to be a bit cumbersome. So there is actually a package that helps make this a little bit easier. And this is also documented in the Filament documentation. So it is recommended by the Filament team. So I'll show you guys very exactly what you need to do. Basically, if you open up the Filament documentation, go in the search box and just type chart. Now, there are a couple of different pages for charts, so it's a little bit scattered all around the documentation. But the one we want to actually take a look at is inside the panel builder. Okay, so not the first one, but the one inside the panel builder. So I'll just go ahead and I'll click on it. We should find it. You just need to scroll down a little bit. And if you scroll down, there is this section where they are kind of recommending a package called Laravel trend. It's basically a package that helps us get our data in a trend. Okay, so it's a very useful package, and I'll show you guys the basics of using it. You can also go ahead and take a look at the documentation if you want more information, but I'll try to explain to you guys how it actually works right now. Okay, so first step for us is to actually go ahead and install this. So I'll just copy this, go to my terminal, paste that in, hit enter. It's going to go ahead and install it for us. Of course, this is not required. It's just a tool or a package to help make this a bit easier. So once this is installed, it's going to take a couple of minutes depending on your internet speed. So it's still downloading some of the packages for us. So while this is downloading in the background, guys, basically the process is very easy. We are going to use this trend class, and it accepts a model, so we can pass it in any eloquent models we have. So in this case, for example, they are using this treatment class. I'm going to use the user class. Next up, you need to give it a date range. So if you have, for example, a line chart, you have a date range, right? So for example, you have from January all the way to December, right? So that's going to be your date range. So that's the next step. You need to pass in a date range. So you can pass in two carbon dates, start and an end. And next up, you're going to say, what are the intervals between that date range, right? So is it going to be per month? So in this line chart, we have it monthly, right? January, February, March, whatever. You might have it weekly, right? Every week or every day. So that's what you're going to pass in over here. And then last but not least, you want to say, what do you want, right? So maybe you want the sum of something, you want the total, you want the count. That's going to be the last part, okay? And then it will basically return all of that in this data. I'll show you guys exactly how the data works right now. So I'll just copy this from here. And the install is indeed done. So let's go ahead and see how that actually works. So I'll come over here, I'll paste the code. First step, we need to import these. So I'll do trend, and it's the first class, so I'll import it. Make sure you do that. Now, obviously, this treatment class does not exist on my project. So I'm going to go ahead and use my user class that always comes with Laravel. And I do have some users that I have added to my database. Next up is going to be the date interval. Okay, for me, the example obviously is using year. I'm going to go ahead and use weekly, I guess. Okay, or maybe a couple of months. So instead of sub year, I'm going to say sub months. So it's going to this kind of subtract a couple of months. I'm going to say minus, let's say 6. So I'm going to add the last 6 months. And then this is going to be the interval type. So there is per month. There is a couple of them. So if you do per, we have per day, per hour, per minute, per month, per year. We already did per day. So that's a couple of these options that you have. I don't see a per week actually over here. So we don't have a per week, but we do have day, hour, month, year, whatever. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to say per month, if I can find it over here. And last but not least, obviously, we want to count the total number of users that we have, right? You can, of course, pass in the column as well. There are a couple of more as well. So there is average, mean, max, there are a couple of more. But in this case, there's also sum. If you want to sum, let's say all the sales every month, you can do that as well. So, and then pass it a column. So in this case, we're just going to go ahead and count the number of users we have every month. Okay. And this is going to, I believe by default, just count it for them. Okay. So that's all we have to do, guys. Now it's going to go ahead and pull all of those data and put them inside this data variable. So to see how it looks, I'm just going to go ahead and dump them. So let's go ahead and do a dd data and see how this data looks. Okay. If you just want to use it, go ahead and just copy the code from the documentation. You're done. But if you want to exactly see how this data looks and get a more explanation on that, you can stay. So let's go back. Let's do a quick reload. And it looks like it is empty. So let me change my date range from -6 to, let's say, -10. And let's see how it looks now. All right, we're not getting any. Let's see if there is any mistakes in the code. Okay, I have made a mistake. This shouldn't be -6. If you are doing add months, you need to do -6. But if you're doing sub months, you just put stop. It's already subtracting. So that's why we are not getting any of them. So if I reload now, hopefully it works now. Still no. I forgot the minus again. Okay, so as you guys can see now, we have this collection that is being returned. And if we take a look at it, we take a peek, it is returning a collection of type trend value, right? So that's part of this trend package. And if you look at every single value, so since we selected 6 months, it also kind of becomes 5 months, right? So we have the first month all the way till now. Every month it has a date, which is going to be basically the label that we are going to use inside the line chart. So if you had like a line chart, date would be the label. And then after that, we have an aggregate, which is basically the value itself, right? So if you look at it, there is, all of these are going to be 0. Oh, there is one with 1. I just seeded my database on the previous video. And as you guys can see, on February 2024, we had 2000 aggregates, right? So that was basically the count, right? So if you had like sum, it would give you the actual sum. So what we have to do is we need to get all of these dates as the labels and then all of these aggregates for our values, right? So now I will go ahead and I will comment this out. And if you take a look at the documentation, they do have the code already, guys. So I'm not going to type it in. Basically, it uses the map function that comes with Laravel collections. It's basically a quick and easy way for you to loop over an array. Okay, so I'll just copy this. And if we go ahead and we replace this data with this, and we need to add these imports. So it was trend value. Actually, let me bring back the DD so we can compare them next to each other. So as you can see, this was type of trend value. So we are looping over our data and it's going to loop over them. Each of the values are going to be of class trend value. And what we are doing, guys, is we are just returning the aggregate value, right? Which is basically the actual number we need to show on the bar chart, right? Or on the line chart. That's all it does. It loops through them, and map returns another array. So that's why we are using it here. It's a quick and easy way of doing it. And we need to do the exact same thing for the labels as well. So I'll just go ahead and do that. The only difference between the labels and the value is obviously instead of aggregate, we need to use date. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and replace this value with date. And that's all we have to do, guys. So I'll just save this. And if you take a look at the documentation, I think it does the exact same thing. Yeah, but if you ever wonder why it's getting aggregate and date, where are these two coming from? Well, it's coming from this trend value class. You can also go ahead and look at it on your text editor. As you can see, it's a very simple class of date and aggregate. That's it. So let's close all of these and let me uncomment this DD. And if you do reload, we should now have a chart that looks very ugly. Straight line. There should be a 1 somewhere around here. And then all of a sudden, boom, it shoots up to the sky. Okay, so that's pretty much it, guys. Sorry, I don't have enough data over here to actually give you guys a good example, but that's the process for it. Very easy to do. You can use it for your line charts, for your bar charts, anything that's kind of using a trend. This package is very convenient, so you don't have to write the code for it yourself. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you have any questions, you can ask me in the comment section below. If you're having trouble setting up any of the charts, you can of course ask me. I'll try to help you guys out if I can. And as always, make sure you like the video if you learned something new and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And I see you guys on the next video. Have a great day. Bye.